Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker. Coming up tonight, I'll be joined by Omar Rahman to discuss whether the Gaza ceasefire can hold. We have thoughts and prayers for Donald Trump, who didn't get his Nobel Peace Prize. And stick around to the end to watch Zack, Polanski and Yusef trade blows on Question Time. Thousands of Palestinians have begun travelling back to northern Gaza as the Israel-Hamas ceasefire has come into effect. The main coastal road connecting northern and southern Gaza were today filled with families who have been living under genocidal conditions for 2 years. Of course, when they get home, they don't know what they will get back to. 74% of homes in Gaza are now either damaged or destroyed. Al Jazeera spoke to 3 Palestinians in makeshift refugee camps about how they felt about moving back home.
First of all, I want to go back and see my house to make sure if it's still there or not. I've got some information that my house has been completely destroyed. We used to live there with my children's families. I will definitely need to find myself a toilet and a tent to live in if the house is gone. I am sure our lives will eventually go back to normal.
The top priority must be given to those dead bodies, like my 2 nephews, who are still under the rubble for more than 18 months. The priority is to get the dead bodies out from under the rubble and bury them in dignified manner. This must be the top priority.
My top priority now is to allow my wife to go abroad for treatment. She needs an operation to save her leg. We need to feel comfortable as a family.
Just those 3 priorities sort of in quick succession. So I want to get back to my home to see how much it's been destroyed. I want to be able to bury my, was it cousins? He said bury family members. And then the final person said, I need medical help for my wife so she can keep her leg. Like, this is the situation of Palestinians in Gaza who have been living through hell for the past 2 years and longer. The return of Palestinians to their homes has been made possible, of course, because the ceasefire agreed on Thursday appears to be holding. Israeli troops have been redeployed to behind the yellow line you can see here. That's set out in the Trump-brokered ceasefire deal. And that still leaves Israel occupying 53% of Gaza's land mass, but not its most densely populated areas. This now begins the countdown for the release of both Israeli and Palestinian captives. And by midday on Monday, Hamas has committed to releasing the remaining hostages they captured on October the 7th, 2 years ago. Israel has in turn committed to releasing 2,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, and many of whom, of course, have been held without charge, often in shocking conditions. Aid agencies are also emphasizing the urgency of flooding Gaza with aid. UNICEF's Tess Ingram spoke to Sky News.
UNICEF has more than 1,300 trucks pre-positioned outside the Gaza Strip, ready to come in alongside trucks from other humanitarian agencies and our UN partners. This aid is life-saving, and we need to see it get in immediately. We need to see a surge in the volume of aid entering the Gaza Strip, and the best way for us to do that is for all available crossings into the Strip to be opened and for those crossings to operate efficiently so that the trucks move through quickly and get where they need to go, which is the children who've been waiting so long for this aid.
If the first phase of this ceasefire does hold, phase 2 will likely bring even bigger challenges. The 20-point Trump deal suggests that Hamas should completely disarm and that Israel should continue to withdraw its occupation forces in Gaza, first to go from occupying 53% of the territory, as it should be now, to 40% and then to 15%. The idea is a buffer zone, or a so-called buffer zone, will survive for a while. Who will ultimately govern Gaza during any transition period, of course, remains to be established. Trump wants a board headed by himself and including Tony Blair to take charge. In their response to the 20-point Trump plan, though, Hamas said that it was not within their power to agree to such a scenario. They said this is for the entire Palestinian people. And speaking today to Sky, a senior Hamas official said that Hamas not being in government in Gaza would not mean them disbanding as a force in the Strip.
We are ready to hand over government. We are ready to be totally away from any government or governing body. But when it comes to Hamas as an entity, as a Palestinian liberation movement, I think no one can overcome or exclude Hamas. Hamas is also present in the West Bank. Hamas is present in Jerusalem, in the diaspora. Therefore, Hamas is not only the government in Gaza. And therefore, yes, we are ready to leave the government for a Palestinian body, but we are still there on the ground.
And what about disarming? Because you're talking about a political ideology, but there's also calls for Hamas to completely disarm itself. Is that something that Hamas is willing to do?
First of all, I have said all other points except the issues or topics related to the first phase, end of the war, withdrawal, prisoner exchange and aid. This is part of the second or third, I don't know how many phases, but this has to be discussed. And this question is belonging to these phases. And this has to be discussed with all other Palestinians about the future of our strategy to struggle for freedom and independence.
Of course, the most immediate concern is perhaps how anyone can trust that Israel won't respond to the return of their hostages by simply reinvading the whole of Gaza, but with even fewer limits than before. Channel 4's Sukunda Kamani shared an interesting hypothesis earlier today. So he said, what's to stop Israel resuming its attacks in Gaza after the hostages are released by Hamas? One Arab security source I spoke to said companies linked to Jared Kushner would be heavily involved in the reconstruction effort in Gaza. And this would form part of the US guarantee against Israel launching a renewed assault. No official announcements on that. Now, that reminds me actually of when it came to the discussions about Ukraine security guarantees, where Zelensky really wanted a formal American guarantee. And the Americans said, well, we want your rare earths. And because we'll have American workers there digging up your rare earths, that means Russia wouldn't dare invade. I'm not sure how seriously we should have taken that. I'm not sure how seriously we should have taken this. I've just actually noticed a tweet from Mohammed Shahada. He's a Palestinian analyst we've had on the show before. He said, I've received new information that shattered any bit of optimism I had about the Trump-Gaza deal. It's neither a plan nor a framework. It's a political performance that aims to legitimize further violence. It's not meant to last beyond the hostage release. These aren't my words. It's the assessment of the very mediators brokering this deal. So no more details on that, but the suggestion that this might all show. And he's saying that maybe the plan is for a full-scale war straight after the hostages are released. To discuss the first 24 hours of the ceasefire and what happens next, I'm joined by Omar H. Rahman, fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. And welcome back to the show. Let's talk about what we do know, which is what's happened over the past 24 hours. Is the ceasefire, in your eyes, going to plan?
First of all, thank you for having me back, Michael. So far, so good, I suppose. The last I heard, there were still some Israeli military actions happening, so that's not good. But at least you're seeing people start to return north, return to their homes, and hopefully the entry of aid. So those are the kind of critical issues in the first stage of this. It's really basically the exchange of captives between Palestinian prisoners and those Israeli hostages that are still there on the ground. I think there's like 72 hours for that exchange to be made, and also the kind of massive surge in humanitarian aid to reach people, to bring in food, to bring in medicine, so that people have medical care, so that you can reverse the tide of famine. Although that's not an easy process, but to get people food and medicine, water, all that kind of thing.
And so I've heard, it's well established that sort of the deadline for releasing the hostages and captives is 72 hours. Is there a similar deadline for letting in a certain amount of aid? Obviously, Israel's always, of course, denied it's blocking aid to get into Gaza in the first place, but now it's said that it's, even though it was never blocking it in the first place, suddenly someone's going to get in there. But is there a deadline to that? Is it the case that we should see 500 trucks going into Gaza tomorrow?
That should be the case. I think it's 400 in the immediate, in the initial maybe day or two, and then it's supposed to be ramped up after that. But yes, I think it should be right away. I don't know the exact logistical issues at the moment and how much aid is getting in now that the ceasefire is in place and has been agreed to. I think Israel kind of delayed after both sides had agreed until their cabinet had met and approved this deal. But now that that's been approved, we should see the entry of aid quickly.
Let's talk about the big issue, which I think still hasn't quite been answered. So, to my mind, the reason that Hamas had previously not released the hostages is because they wanted a permanent end to the war, and they never trusted that Netanyahu, after getting the hostages released, wouldn't just go back for more and begin the genocidal war again, but with no pressure anymore from the Israeli public saying we want our hostages back. What do we have to feel assured that that won't happen? I mean, I suppose the question is what would have reassured Hamas that that won't happen? Do you have an idea that there is any kind of backstop to stop Israel just immediately going back to war, or maybe not immediately, but within a month or so?
I mean, it's a very good question, and in a sense, it is a leap of faith. But I think Hamas's back was seriously to the wall here. Israel was proceeding with its genocidal operations with the full backing of the United States, and even with this deal, I mean, there was the ultimatum being made by Israel and the U.S. Trump both saying it while the deal was being announced. And then in tweets or whatever afterwards, saying like basically Hamas better accept this, or there's going to be massive bloodshed. There's going to Israel finish the job, etc. So Hamas is in a position in which Palestinians on the ground are being slaughtered. They're being starved. It can't protect them, and yet there's nobody coming in to save Palestinians. I think that's objectively clear at this point, 2 years into a live stream genocide, that the international community, the Arab states, everybody else, nobody's responding, nobody's intervening with force to protect Palestinians from Israel's genocidal and ethnic cleansing objectives here. So I think Hamas was in that position where it was, it's sort of in a state of desperation. There's no alternative. What could they do to force an end to this? And the only reason I think we've gotten even into this point was not because of Hamas's force of arms. It was not because Israel suddenly decided, Netanyahu suddenly decided that he prioritized the release of the hostages, because he's done everything, I think, in his power to show that he doesn't really care about the fate of the hostages. It wasn't that international pressure brought the Israelis to their knees, or that Trump suddenly decided, he was sick of seeing massacred Palestinian babies on his screen. I don't think any of that was the case. I mean, the fact is that Israel blundered in September by overreaching and attacking Qatar, and that sort of galvanized Arab and Muslim states to see their security very much at risk, and it embarrassed and put Donald Trump in a very uncomfortable position in which he was forced to, sort of placate U.S. allies in the region, and they pushed for a number of things, but one of the things they pushed for was for a serious engagement and a plan to end this starvation and slaughter in Gaza, and so that's where we're at. Netanyahu got his hands on that deal, along with the Americans like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and all those guys. And so what ended up is an extremely bad deal that might not get implemented in the end, but it is something that for now I think can at least halt this genocide, and hopefully it can be parlayed into a longer permanent end and some type of reconstruction and relief effort. Now, the sticking points that have always been there through this negotiation process, which you just mentioned a little bit earlier, such as the totality and timing of an Israeli withdrawal, whether Israel would withdraw fully from the Gaza Strip, which Hamas had been demanding. Whether that's going to happen or not, we still don't know, and it still hasn't been negotiated. Whether Hamas itself would disarm or disband, those kind of questions are still on the table, and what the future kind of political structure and the nature of Palestinian governance in Gaza will look like in the future. None of that has been determined. Those are all major sticking points, and the parties are very far apart. So whether Trump can pressure the Israeli side, whether those Arab and Muslim states that have brought, I think, Trump to this point are capable of continuing to exercise leverage on him, we don't know. But there is the kind of growing tide of diplomacy from those states, as well as European states that are kind of, I think, at their end, and want to see this sort of resolved. And I think that is putting some amount of pressure that gives, I think, us some amount of hope.
And let's talk about those Arab countries, because it seems, a lot of reporting on what you've just said, it seems as if that failed attack on Hamas negotiators in Qatar basically increased the leverage of the Arab states, because it took some leverage away from Netanyahu. What is it that the Arab states want? So if they have more leverage now, what are their red lines? I suppose they don't want the people of Gaza to be forced out, in part because they think that would destabilize their own regimes. What else do you see as sort of their priorities when it comes to negotiating or having an influence on the future of Gaza and Palestine as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with there's been an increase in recognition that this issue needs to be resolved, not only to kind of safeguard Palestinians, but also for the security and stability of the region. I think that was recognized early on, but certainly the attack on Qatar on September 9th brought that home, that even the Gulf states, even those who are very close allies of the United States, even those like Qatar who are hosting the largest American military base in the region, were not safe from this kind of Israeli hyper aggression and the inability for Trump to stop it, to prevent it. And so I think that was a huge wake up call for these states. So certainly I think they want Israeli reined in by the United States. That's where a lot of the pressure is. But they also want this issue in Gaza to be resolved for both the security of the region and also, again, the populations inside the United States, very similar to Europe. Except that you have much more free expression in Europe, although that's being, obviously repressed and curbed in the streets of London and Berlin and Amsterdam and everywhere else. You see this massive mobilization that's putting pressure on those states in Europe, and those Arab states. You're not seeing that mobilization on the streets, but they know that it's there, and so I think there is a desire to bring this to an end for, again, the stability and security of the region. At the same time, these states were very reticent early on to commit to involving themselves on the ground in terms of reconstruction and everything else, and governance and security. They were ready to do it, but they were reticent unless this was part of a larger political framework to resolve the overall Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this underlies really the push for two states that we're seeing between Arab states like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and those others, and European states that are pushing that direction. But the Israelis are completely opposed to it, and the Americans, especially under Trump, haven't even rhetorically supported that. And so that reticence is eroding a little bit because of how dire the situation is on the ground and the need to stop it, and the realization that America is not going to stop it, and if America is not, then nobody is. And so they want to get involved, and they've committed themselves to being involved on the ground in Gaza, but they need kind of certain conditions to be met, like maybe the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, so that they're not stuck there indefinitely while Israel continues to carry out attacks in Gaza, but it definitely continues to pursue its annexationist, expansionist policies in the West Bank. And so, in a way, what I've called, they would become the Palestinian Authority 2.0, where they become kind of complicit. They become an arm of the Israeli occupation. I think they recognize that and don't want that to happen. So they're trying to really push for more Palestinian involvement on the ground, and the Israelis have been pushing back against that.
I suppose on the humanitarian side, we talked about aid flooding in. That should happen almost immediately, one would hope. When it comes to rebuilding Gaza, obviously, 3/4 of the buildings are destroyed or damaged. Lots of people are going back to homes that no longer exist anymore. At what point, we've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of this ceasefire deal. At what point will rebuilding begin? Because presumably you need some kind of political stability to start reconstructing Gaza. What's the deal there? What do you see happening?
I mean, hopefully it happens sooner than later, but I think you kind of mobilize the resources for that. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I think what they're trying to do immediately is bring in housing and shelter that's more durable than the tents. And I think one of the things I read even today on Al Jazeera was that Qatar may spearhead or take the lead in both the reconstruction and the administration of aid distribution efforts, and take it out of the hands of the Israelis, because the Israelis have been preventing, obviously, not just food and water and medicine and all that kind of stuff, but basic supplies for shelter, and winter is coming to the Gaza Strip, and people need kind of relief immediately. So to bring in prefabricated houses and caravans and stuff like that can get people some amount of shelter before a broader rebuilding begins. But even before that, I think immediately, I think the rehabilitation of critical infrastructure, water infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, electricity, power, everything needs to be handled immediately. And I've seen that in some of the texts. would be one of the immediate priorities.
Omar, Rahman, thank you so much for joining us again on Novara Live. We always really appreciate your time and your insights. Donald Trump had been lobbying hard to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Multiple world leaders have been pressured to nominate him. It was by many accounts a key reason why he pushed Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire. And in the 24 hours before the announcement, he appeared to be running his own personal social media campaign. And these are all posts made throughout Thursday on Truth Social by Donald Trump. So in quick succession, thank you, Washington Post. Wow. And he's sharing an article that says, opinion, yes, Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. He also shares an article from Fox News that says, angel parents call for Trump to receive Nobel Peace Prize for border security efforts. Then he shares a video from Breitbart that says, peace through strength, Trump's Gaza deal and why he deserves the Nobel. And then this is probably the best one. Trump, thank you. And this is the Jewish GOP group, so that's the Republican group. Trump shouldn't just win the Nobel Prize, it should be renamed after him. So from now on, anyone will just win the Trump Prize, the Trump Peace Prize, I suppose. So he really wanted it, which means that when he tuned into the Nobel Committee's live stream this morning, I imagine Trump had all his fingers and toes crossed.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 to Maria Corina Machado. She is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for her tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and for her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy.
He tried so hard. You can't fault him for trying, but it went to someone else. Maria Corina Machado is an opposition leader in Venezuela. She's long been a main opponent of Hugo Chavez and then Nicolas Maduro. She was a key organizer of 2014 protests against Maduro. But she's most prominent, and presumably the reason she won this award is because she won the opposition primary to stand against Maduro in last year's presidential election, but was barred from taking part in the actual contest since August 2024. She has been in hiding. Very much divided reactions to Maria Corina Machado winning this award. What do I think about it? I think it is pretty clear that the elections in 2024 were fraudulent. The Carter Center said that. They're thought to be a sort of very independent organization. It's not just sort of neocons who are saying that that was a stolen election. She is at the same time a very right-wing figure. She supported the sanctions against Venezuela, which is one of the reasons that the economy has completely been crippled. Probably not the only reason, but one of them. She's also wanted for a very long time to privatize the national oil company. So you can see why she's popular in Washington. Also, lots of people on social media have been talking today about how she is very pro-Israel. So in 2018, she wrote to Netanyahu asking him to intervene in Venezuelan politics. She said she would recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel if she were to become leader of Venezuela. So a mixed bag, I suppose. I think what's quite interesting here is it seems as if she was kind of seen as a compromise candidate by the Nobel Peace Prize committee because they didn't want to give it to Donald Trump because that would seem too ridiculous. And because it would so obviously have been them sort of wielding to a very open, explicit pressure campaign, it would have made them look a bit silly. But also they didn't really want to piss off the guy, so they couldn't choose someone who was in any way opposed to Trump. So they've chosen very much a Trump-aligned person to win this award. Obviously, Trump hates Maduro. He's often talked about the idea of having a coup in Venezuela, something which I guess Maria Corina Machado would be in favor of as well. So they've gone for someone who can plausibly be considered, a liberation figure because she is living in a country where democracy has ceased to function. But she is also very much aligned to the Republicans in Washington. Curtis, Trump will be disappointed. Do you think the award went to the right person, or can you see why the committee made this decision? It's no surprise, I suppose, they didn't give it to Greta Thunberg and the flotilla because that would have really pissed off Donald Trump.
I can imagine that he threw his remote at the TV. He's now got a smashed TV because he's waiting for this moment. did it go to the right person? I think, to me, that's not the right question to ask. The question I have is the entire system, the reward system. It's bogus. It's complete rubbish. And I'll tell you why. They shouldn't call it the Nobel Peace Prize. They should call it the Nobel War Prize. Remember, Barack Obama won that Peace Prize. This guy is known as the Drone King. He engaged in more drone attacks than George Bush by tenfold, right? So I think the entire thing is bogus. Where you are very much right is it's kind of, I wouldn't say Trump aligned, but establishment aligned. Because I think this award ceremony is just completely captured by the establishment. She's pro-privatization. She wanted to privatize the, what's it called? I've got it written down. The Venezuelan energy companies. She wanted to open up the markets to it and let foreign companies get involved. Very much pro-establishment. And I think it's kind of a rigged sort of award vote. But the idea that even Donald Trump is in the same conversation as the Nobel Peace Prize is wild to me as well. I mean, all this rhetoric around Trump being, anti-war and pro-peace, complete rubbish. In his first term, I think he actually engaged in more drone strikes than the king himself, Obama. So Trump is the drone queen, shall we say. He ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, all this talk about, nuclear weapons, and obviously we want to live in a world where there's less than, in a perfect society, there's none. And for all the faults of Obama, all the faults of the Democrats, that was a really good thing. A deal in which we could guarantee that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Trump just ripped that up. Think about the second term, renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, talking about invading Canada. I know he hasn't done these things, but that doesn't sound like a peaceful president to me. Now, he is just the establishment, all right? I think a lot of people within the establishment are worried about Donald Trump's temerity, his character. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But his, especially on foreign policy, completely aligned with Washington foreign policy. And when Maria got this award, it was basically a signal to say, all right, we won't give it to Trump because it could be controversial. But this is still very much an insider person we can give it to. Now, I understand when it comes to Venezuela, I think they dropped 40 points in the Freedom Index, right? They have a huge democratic deficit, widely regarded as a dictatorship. Of course, yes, she has been on protest to so-called democratize the state. Whether that's true or whether she just wants power is another thing. But I don't think we should be giving Nobel Peace Prizes to those who are just against Maduro. Of course, she has also been a big supporter of Israel. And once again, the state of Israel is a pro-war endeavor, not just the genocide in Gaza, right? But I think they've started, 7 wars in the Middle East? Lebanon, Syria, they tried to go off the Golan Heights. So it's all a farce. And I think the mainstream media will be looking at this through the lens of, oh no, Trump didn't get the award. And yes, it's very cathartic to know that he's probably pissing and crying his pants over it. But I want to sort of look at this, look at the wider picture of this and say the entire award system is complete rubbish. They should name it the Nobel War Prize, not the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, the point Trump has is that it was ridiculous. He's always really annoyed that they gave it to Obama, and they shouldn't have given it to Obama. So they gave it to Obama before he'd done anything. As you say, he did go on to expand a bunch of drone wars, but they gave it to him before he'd organized anything. If they'd given it to Obama after he signed the Iran nuclear deal, that would have made sense. If they'd given it to Obama, obviously they should have then given it to the Iranian leaders as well. If they'd given it to Obama, and they could have given it to Castro as well, when America and Cuba came to that deal, that would have been a good thing. But just giving it to the guy for being elected president was very strange. You can see why Trump does have a bit of a chip on his shoulder, but as you say, he also shouldn't win this award. I would say, though, if you are a big defender of the Nobel Peace Prize, you could say that the last few months has proven why it's so valuable, because it might be the case that this ceasefire deal is in the medium term a farce. I think that's very much possible, but it also seems like a reason why there is a ceasefire deal in the first place is because Donald Trump really wanted to win the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's impact, I suppose, to some degree. Now, you might not know this, but our most popular newsletter lands in inboxes across the country every Friday morning. If you missed Ash's take on the Gaza ceasefire this morning, don't worry. You can still sign up before Monday to get Novara's very own Stephen Meffen's take on the weekend's news. Just head to novara.media/thecortado to sign up. I'm always looking for more opportunities to talk about the world's most populous country on this show. and we don't talk about India and its 1.4 billion people nearly enough. And this week, Keir Starmer has given us an excuse. The British Prime Minister has been in Mumbai with industry leaders on a trade delegation.
Deal done, but now he's gleefully coming back for more, and the feeling is mutual. Hundreds of billboards lining the highway to Mumbai to welcome Sir Keir Starmer and his delegation of around 130 chief executives, business leaders and university vice-chancellors.
By the time I walk around on the plane on the way home, I want each of you to tell me what you've got out of this trip, a deal, a contact, or something else.
Keir Starmer only ever looks happy when he's abroad on a nice junket trip. That was how the UK's Channel 4 reported the trip of Starmer to India. The Indian media appear to have also welcomed the visit. A popular pro-Modi channel used Starmer's visit as an opportunity to bash the opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi.
This very day, it is important to remind the ones who called India a dead economy. Remember, just 3 months ago, on 31st of July, leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, while addressing the lower house of the parliament, insulted India's economy openly. Echoing US President Donald Trump's statement, Mr. Rahul termed his dead economy remark as a fact. He openly said, Mr. Trump has stated a fact that everyone knows except the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. But viewers, where is Rahul Gandhi now when the largest ever trade delegation from UK is embracing India for business opportunities?
One of the only people I've seen recently celebrate a visit from Keir Starmer, so he'll be pleased with that. The gripe from the host there was that Rahul Gandhi, so he's the leader of the Indian opposition, had agreed or had suggested that Trump was correct when he posted in July this. He said, "I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care." Trump, of course, hasn't been friendly to India since beginning his second term. And since August, the country has faced a massive 50% tariff from the United States on its exports, as ostensibly as punishment for importing Russian oil. And to discuss how India is weathering the Trump tariffs and whether it really is a dead economy, I spoke earlier to Arjun Ramani, who recently left The Economist magazine after working there for 3 years covering India. And he's now doing a PhD at MIT. I began by asking him about the significance of Starmer's trip.
The main thing the trip signals is a commitment from the British side to actually enforce and put into practice the free trade agreement that was signed over the summer and sort of build on that for continued economic integration. And, this signing trade deals has been part of India's sort of manufacturing export strategy for the last several years, right? They've had this massive public infrastructure push, building roads, railways, airports, etc. The goal of that was to reduce logistics costs within the country to make Indian manufacturing exports more competitive. But you don't see a big surge in manufacturing exports, and everyone's like, "What's the next bottleneck?" Well, one of the other bottlenecks is for a lot of these exports, India doesn't have free trade agreements in place with its major trading partners that other countries, like for example Bangladesh or Vietnam, do. So, and this will provide market access to a lot of those sectors that are important, like for example, labor-intensive manufacturing sectors like textiles. So I think it is, important in that respect. I think it also suggests that despite America's retreat from the international trading order, you're still seeing like allies like the UK and sort of non-aligned powers like India, they're continuing to go along, right? Even if you don't have a functional World Trade Organization, you can still strengthen ties bilaterally. I think that will continue to happen. So yeah, I think it's a good news story for India.
You were saying that India's strategy had been to invest lots in infrastructure and logistics to try and boost an export economy. That must mean that Donald Trump's 50% tariffs for Indian exports came as a real blow to the Indian economy. Is that the case? Can you talk about that?
That's exactly right. I think I've seen estimates, various people project, if they actually stay in place, you could see, a point shaved off of India's annual growth rate, which is very, very big for like a single macro shock. That said, a big mitigating factor is, number one, most of India's exports to the US are services, which are tech services. There's another threat to that, which we could talk about later, which is AI. But I think the tariffs don't directly impact that. And secondly, I was in India for a week, a few weeks ago, actually meeting with a lot of people in Delhi, including chief economic advisor, various officials in government. And, I think they believe themselves, at least, I hope, when they say they don't think that number, the 50% number, will be the number in 6 months. They realize that the economic consequences of no deal are very high, and Trump wants a deal too. So I think there's intent on both sides. I mean, basically what happened, the reason there was a breakdown in negotiations was it was very personality driven, right? There was the bombing by terrorists, probably coming from Pakistan in Kashmir a few months ago. A ceasefire was brokered. Trump claimed credit for it. Pakistan was willing to give him that credit. India wasn't, for good reason, because I think there was some diplomatic brokering coming from J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, but it wasn't that substantial. So India didn't think it. It's sort of also an insult to India that, hey, you have this country that's effectively a military dictatorship in Pakistan. India is a much, much larger economy. Why should we be put on the same playing field? It was sort of an insult to Indian pride. So I think it's possible to get past that. Now you're going to see higher tariff levels for everyone, right? So all U.S. trading partners are going to have a worse time. And unlike the UK or the EU, India does want to maintain sort of this strategic neutrality, non-alignment. That's a policy that, despite the growing ties with the West over the past 20 years, I think this event has sort of just reinforced to Indian elites that, yes, we are neutral. There's a reason why we've maintained this type of non-alignment. And so I think that message has been reinforced among Indian elites.
And as well as sort of imposing these sanctions on India, Donald Trump has called India a dead economy. That's how he dismissed the Indian economy sort of when Modi was meeting with Putin. I've seen from the Indian media that has caused some controversy because the opposition leader, Rahul Gandhi, agreed with Donald Trump and said, yes, India is a dead economy. And now there are people on the Modi side sort of saying that he's being very unpatriotic. But I suppose from an objective standpoint, does it make sense to call India a dead economy?
No, I think that's kind of absurd. India is a developing country, $3,000 GDP per capita, maybe slightly less, 7.5 K per person, adjusted for purchasing power. So yes, it's a poor country. It doesn't have major exports that are backed by intellectual property in any key strategic sectors. It exports a lot of refined oil. It exports a lot of agricultural products. It exports a lot of tech services that are replaceable. So yes, it doesn't have a lot of bargaining power in the global stage yet, but it's growing at 6 to 8% a year. There's a lot of debate over those numbers. I think they probably are at least 6%. You can't trust the quarterly numbers, and we can talk about that. Pramit Bhattacharya has a very good book coming out actually on this, on measuring the informal economy in India. And you basically can't trust the quarterly numbers because a lot of the informal sector is imputed from the formal sector, and you don't get sort of the rebasing unless you have surveys of the informal sector. We're going to get a new one this year, so I think there will be a lot more clarity at the end of 2026 on what the actual growth figures are in India. But if you look at the growth in exports, which we measure really, really well, right? Like it's really hard to fudge with export figures. You're seeing high single-digit, double-digit growth across a lot of categories. I think India is definitely growing at least 6% a year. I think it's very not true that it's a dead economy. It's growing more than double the rest of the world, right? Without data centers, the US is at, 0.1%, 0.5%. China is probably growing at 2 to 3%, some very low number. And so, yeah, I don't really know where that comes from. I think it's just a sort of, maybe it's a statement around the fact that India doesn't have like a key strategic position in the global economy. Yeah, I mean, I think, Rahul Gandhi has to say that. We actually met with him on the last trip over the summer. I think, he's very well-read, curious person, engages a lot of people openly, but I sort of disagree with his assessment on the economy. He has to say that though, right? He's the opposition leader.
I suppose people watching might be thinking, who cares about these numbers? It doesn't really matter. But I mean, 1.4 billion people live in India. And I think in my mind, whether or not India can become a middle income or even a rich country in the 21st century is sort of one of the biggest questions around, if what you care about is sort of human flourishing. So, I mean, is India a good news story when it comes to development still? I mean, obviously lots of concerns about Modi politically, but sort of how do you view the next few decades? That's a very big question, but when it comes to sort of Indian development and growth.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a hard one. I would say broadly, the development story in India, you have to say is a positive, right? It has so many countries don't give you consistent 6 to 7%. And India has basically since the reforms in 1991. That's remarkable. Extreme poverty has plummeted. Infant mortality has plummeted, and it's continuing to do so. I spent some time in some of the poorest parts of Bihar last summer, and there's a lot of dire poverty, but there's actually not very much starvation. There is, working infrastructure. People have basic, running water and things like that. So I think that's definitely something to be celebrated. The long-term outlook, it partly does depend on this trading situation, right? Because if you're, how have all the countries who've gotten rich in the latter part of the 20th century, they did so through export-led growth, because your domestic economy is too poor to rely on local demand. So, if the rest of the world is closing off, that does mean, India is not going to grow at 8, 9, 10%. It's going to be several percentage points lower per year than the Asian tigers. But the flip side of that is, and I think there's been some energy in this direction, is when the external environment gets weaker, that acts as sort of a push to get your domestic, structural reforms in order. And there's been a lot of conversation about the last few months, basically since the tensions with the US have worsened and the trade situation has worsened. You've seen the GST, the national consumption tax. It's been simplified at 4 rates with many exceptions, and that's been simplified to kind of 2 major levels, and a lot of these kind of national rules and regulations have been struck. One actually announcement that is sort of very undercovered, but interesting, is if you look at the city of Bangalore, which I think is very critical to India's future growth, and it's one of the worst governed cities, given its economic clout that you could imagine. Basically, it's no one knows who the mayor or municipal corporation chairman of Bangalore is. It's effectively run by the state government, but they've now created this governing board for the city. The chief minister of the state is explicitly in charge of that board, and it has these sort of 5 sub-governing agencies for different parts of the city. And it's not the first best solution, but it's like an explicit governance structure with clear accountability. My hope is this will, make the Bangalore metro be built a bit faster. But I think city governance is going to be critical for India's growth over the next 20, 30 years. That's where the service sector is going to grow from. And in a lot of in emerging market big cities, you're getting diseconomies of agglomeration, right? Where you get these so much congestion that the benefits you normally get from cities are sort of canceled out. And anytime I see energy towards improving city governance, I feel more optimistic about the long term. But yeah, India is not going to be an Asian tiger. It's not going to grow at 8, 9, 10%. But if it keeps what it's doing right now up, that's pretty significant.
That was Arjun Ramani speaking to me earlier today, and we'll be putting out a slightly longer version of that interview on our channel tomorrow, where we get into how artificial intelligence could break India's growth model. I know some of you in the live chat get annoyed when I talk about artificial intelligence, so we've moved it into the interview tomorrow, which you can check out if you so please. There are only 2 parties with any kind of momentum in Britain right now. You've got Reform, who are leading in the polls, and they've been leading for a very long time, and you've got the Greens, who are surging in the polls, even if not yet at the level of Reform. Well, leaders from both parties went head-to-head on Question Time this week. Zack Polanski from the Greens. I mean, of course, he's not the leader of reform, but I think probably the second most important person in reform after Nigel Farage, Zia Yusuf.
I'm afraid I'm going to mention immigration because it is, according to the latest YouGov poll, the number one issue for ordinary British people, for voters across this great country. Of course, it's not the only issue. I couldn't agree with that more. And as someone, by the way, who's a second-generation immigrant, whose parents came to this country in the early 1980s, and I'd like to think have contributed. They're given half a century of service between them to the NHS. I know how much immigrants have contributed, but it is absolutely true that there has been far too much mass immigration in this country. It has been to the detriment of this country. We've had enormous numbers. The Tories are most culpable for that, but I'm afraid the Labour government are frankly pouring gasoline on that problem.
Zia, do you ever think it's the number one problem because you spend a lot of time spreading misinformation and fear to make it?
So that intervention from Zack went down well in the room. I think it's a good point. You know, when people say people really care about this is the number one issue in the country. It's like, well, is it? Do you have something to do with that? You know, it's a bit self-fulfilling, isn't it? You talk about immigration so much that it then becomes the number one topic, and then you say, well, the reason we're talking about it so much is because it's the number one topic. As I say, that intervention from Zack appeared to go down well in the room. And he and Zia Yusuf went on to have an extended head-to-head.
You just accused me of spreading misinformation. Please tell me, and the people watching at home, what is it that I just said?
Because you've said the first bit, which is correct, that we don't have enough prison spaces, that we don't have enough NHS beds, and that we don't have investment in our communities. What immigrant has taken away those resources, as opposed to those resources being funded? So you can't blame austerity on one hand, but then say it's the immigrants. The immigrants haven't caused austerity. The same Thatcherite policies that you and your party support, and the Conservatives, of what have caused the devastation in this country. And you should take responsibility for that too.
Do you think that 6.5 million net new people arriving inside 14 years, 11 million gross new people arriving in this country, against the wishes of the British people, by the way, who voted against such things in 4 consecutive elections, you tell me, you don't think that's going to put pressure on public services?
Well, first of all, we were told Brexit would bring down immigration. Actually, what it's done is brought up immigration.
And you can blame the Tories for that.
So there was a mess that Nigel Farage started with that when he gave misinformation
I
to the
don't
public.
believe Nigel Farage was in government for those 14 years.
Oh, yeah, I think he was pretty around, though, and on Question Time quite.
He was not in government, I'm afraid.
Big row there. That row, though, is nothing compared to what happened later in the show.
You absolutely are a fascist. You're from a far-right party. Right. You're Nigel Farage.
Let's just be clear about that.
Zia, wait. I'm going to let Zack talk, and then I'm going to let you come in. No, wait a minute.
Your concern about Muslims extends only so much as they agree with your political
I realise he's made an allegation. I'm going to let Zack talk, and then I'm going to let you respond.
Let's bring the receipts. Nigel Farage, he joined forces with the Swedish Democrats in the European Parliament. This is a far-right Nazi group. They want to deport people, not based on the colour of his skin, but from the places that they've come from. They also, Nigel Farage, talked about it being the end of democracy because of the way certain ethnic minorities are voting. These aren't robust words, as Annabelle called them earlier, or we've heard on the conversation. This is racism, it's fascism, and we should call it out.
Zia.
Okay, so what we want to do is deport people on the basis of whether they are legally entitled to be in this country. That has nothing to do with race, ethnicity, nor religion. Now let's talk. You accused me earlier, let alone fascist. You said that I was peddling disinformation. And I think people watching this program at home, given the Green Party are right now, to be fair, they're surging in the polls. It's important that people know this. When Zack Polanski is making seductive claims to you, it's important that you understand, before he came into politics, he literally made money by charging women on the promise that he could literally enlarge the size of their breasts by hypnotizing them. That is a true statement. And by the way, if you think that's insane, his policies are even more insane. He wants a world without borders. He wants open borders. He wants us to stand down and destroy our nuclear deterrent as Vladimir Putin belligerently marauds into Ukraine. He wants a communist economic system. He wants to legalize all drugs. And in Zack Polanski's version of Britain, his version of Britain, it is legal to sell fentanyl, crack cocaine, and heroin, but illegal to rent your flat out. This is the most unserious person to enter British politics in my life.
And what I want to ask Zia, if we're talking about people's past records, Nathan Gill, this is a man who was found guilty on bribery with the Russian state. Now, Zia said that Nigel Farage and Reform did not know who this man was. But Nigel Farage, including the day after Brexit happened, was pictured with 4 men behind him. One of them being former MEP for Reform, Nathan Gill. The man that Zia says no one knows who he was. So were you lying, or was Nigel Farage lying?
Zack, I'm afraid, if you want to use the word lie, let's be clear about something. You are lying. What I said is I have never met. I took over as chairman in the summer of last year. I will tell you, I have never met Nathan Gill in my life.
So there's quite a lot of context required there, really, to the argument. So you probably already know about the hypnotherapy boob job story. Zack has repeatedly apologised for it. I did actually read the Sun article this morning, and the woman he hypnotised, according to the Sun, her chest did get 2 inches larger. This is not me endorsing boob hypnosis, but that's what the Sun article said. The Nathan Gill story is a newer one. He is a former Reform MEP who last month admitted taking bribes to make statements in favour of Russia while being a member of the European Parliament. So that is very, very corrupt. And between December 2018 and July 2019, Gill took money from Oleg Voloshin in exchange for making pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament and in the media. Yusuf had previously tried to say that Gill was not close to Farage or anyone of significance in Reform. The Byline Times presents a different narrative. So they say, in fact, Gill and Farage were thick as thieves, with insiders telling them that Gill was one of Farage's closest aides. And they unearthed quite a good quote, actually, from Farage in 2016. He was backing Gill to be UKIP's leader in Wales. And he said, "I have worked with Nathan Gill over a period of years, and he's been terrific. He's never, ever let me down. He's as honest as the day is long." A short day, a midwinter day, maybe. Curtis, I suppose, there probably wasn't a clear winner in the sort of rows they were having, taking chunks out of each other. But one thing you definitely could say is that the audience were only really listening to two people on that stage. I can never get the whole way through an episode of Question Time, but I watched a fair amount of it. And no one would have really noticed that the Labour person or the Tory person was there. There was also a right-wing journalist, but it basically was all about the Greens and Reform as the two parties with momentum, with energy, who seem to have something to say.
That's a good thing. That's what you want. You want to see look, obviously we don't want to endorse Reform or boost their politics, but they are leading in the polls. They have a presence. So you kind of want to see the surge in the left rather than this sort of background noise of the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So I'm very happy that it was just between them two. I think people were tuning in to see them two, to see Zack Polanski. This was Zack's first test on Question Time, and I think he passed very well. Look, I mean, you can sort of agree or disagree on who won that particular exchange, but I can tell you something. The hypno boo job story, no one cares. They really, really don't. And people coming out and attacking me on this are like, yeah, the media ran that story when Zack became leader. No one's bothered anymore. Like, this is not the politics of 2015, 2016, right? People want solutions to problems. We have multiple crises in this country and globally, and people want to hear solutions. So when Yusuf says about a hypno boob job thing, people aren't really listening. But the Russian story, well, that's a real big kicker for Reform. That's probably their only biggest weakness. I mean, they have a lot of weakness in policy areas, but in terms of rhetoric and how they're seen through the lens of the media, I think that's a real sticking point for them. And Zack really has been the only one who's majorly attacked Reform on this. Not surprised that the Conservatives haven't really attacked Reform on it, because they took loads of money from Russian oligarchs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was in 2018 when Jeremy Corbyn called out. And there were many in the press going, "Oh, don't play political football with this." And again, it's funny when people sort of labelled Jeremy as sort of pro-Russia when he was one calling it out. But I think this is a bigger win for Zack because he got a lot of his talking points in there. On the terms of whether like Zai is a fascist or a fascist political party, that's maybe a debate. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But I think getting that word in there, framing the debate is very, very helpful for Zack. Now, when you're the leader of the Labour Party, or I say they're a major party only because they're in government. They won't be for much longer. There is a kind of a balancing act. You do have to be a little bit careful with what you call people because you're trying to win the majority of people over. The Green Party are in a very unique and good position, which is that they're not trying to get a majority in government. They're trying to win 30, 40, maybe even 50 seats, which will be a huge win if they get that. They're not trying to win a majority, so they can be they have a bit more room to sort of say what they really want to say. And they can come out with things that the majority of people might disagree. I mean, if we were to poll people, is Nigel Farage a fascist? I would suspect that majority would probably say no. That doesn't really matter. They didn't really get to the heart of the debate when it comes to abolish landlords. I know that Yusuf said, you want to have legalization of drugs, but you want to make renting out illegal. Of course, that's not true. But I think that the abolishing landlords thing, even though the policies within it isn't strictly abolishing landlords, that gets headlines, that reframes the debate. And I think that's the main thing for the Green Party. You need to push the Overton window to the left or back to the left and dominate the narrative. I'm very glad, that Zack's new sort of leadership style, which I think the Green Party's been too technocratic for too long, his new eco-populist style is working. We're seeing, the rise in the polls. We're seeing the fact that they've hit 95,000 members, could be more. That's the last time I've seen it. Could be 100,000. Is that it's not to try and respond to every single lie from Reform Party, but just to come back with your own narrative. It could have been easily sort of Zack being bogged down trying to fight off the fact that they have a communist economic policy or they want open borders. Neither of these things are true, by the way. Even the Green Party, which is still a social democratic party, isn't calling for open borders. The left are not calling for open borders. They're just saying, don't blame everything on migrants, right? Two different things, but of course, it's in Reform's interest to push that lie. When you accept their framing and try and bat away those individual lies, the entire debate is on immigration. Zack, on the other hand, said, look, it's austerity, it's public services. I'm not going to engage in that debate. Here's what we need to do. And that's very effective. So I think, I'm trying to be objective here, take my left-wing hat off for a second and see how they really came across. I think it matters, when you're playing the game on whose terms. So if Reform are speaking and they're talking about immigration, they're going to come out on top. That's their terrain. And when the left or progressives talk about immigration, either try and just argue against their framing of it or even capitulate to it, like Keir Starmer, I know he's not a progressive, then you're winning on their terms. If you reframe the debate, which is what Zack is doing, which is economic equality, wealth taxes, public ownership, by the way, then you're winning. So I do think, objectively, again, it was only one question time performance. I think Zack probably came out as the winner here. And a lot of the attacks from Yusuf didn't land. Even the hit no boob story, no one cared about it. So I think Zack needs to keep on pushing. He also needs to be aggressive, which I think he kind of was on that night. Don't wait to be attacked. Go for the attack. It's what we need in a left-wing leader. No more Mr. Nice Guy, shall we say. Someone to go out there, be aggressive, set the tone of the debate. And I think Zack did that pretty well.
Just before we finish, you're at the World Transformed. It's obviously a big debate going on in the left at the moment about who to get behind. As far as I understand, Zack has a Q&A tomorrow at the World Transformed. And Zara and Jeremy Corbyn spoke today on a panel. I don't know if you were at that, but sort of what's the atmosphere on the ground from the people you've spoken to? Is the momentum with your party or the Greens?
Interesting question. So we sent one of our reporters to Liverpool yesterday to cover the Your Party event. I think there was a slight re-energizing of what was happening with Your Party. Of course, the public spats, the secrecy, basically the kerfuffle that went on. A lot of people were demoralized. A lot of people went to the Greens. There was a slight re-emergence of that energy. My colleague spoke to both Jeremy and Zara. They put across a very united front and they said they want to get on with it. But that's not been at the behest of the Green Party. The Green Party are marching forward. What I can say, Callum Taylor, my colleague, did say that when he spoke to people at this event yesterday, there is very much an appetite to work with the Greens. So I think that, I feel a lot more hopeful today than maybe I did like 2 weeks ago. I think the energy is still there. The last poll that came out, the Greens were on 15%. They hit 95k subscribers. Jeremy and Zara put together an event. They got a standing ovation in a packed out crowd. So maybe this sort of loose coalition could potentially work. I do think there is a re-emergence of that energy, though, from both sides. The momentum is probably still with the Green Party, though.
Curtis, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the World Transformed. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I rushed through this because it's 7:02, but I don't know why I'm so impatient. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back on Monday at 6 p.m. Have a fantastic weekend. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.